When we write music, it's not coming from a love of melody and a joy of intricate chord progressions or technical wizardry. It's just, I want you to authentically feel this way.
The Social Network.
Let the hacking begin. First up is Kirkland. They keep everything open and allow indexes in their Apache configuration, so little double get magic.
With Social Network, he had originally asked if I'd be interested in scoring his next film, and I have immense respect for David, and I knew him a little bit socially. But it was coming right at a time where I was burnt out from touring. We were just finishing a tour, and I just promised myself I was going to take some time off. And the thought of trying to learn a new medium and not really knowing not at all knowing what I'm doing, I had to say, I don't want to ruin your movie, and I want to be fair to myself, because I need to get back up to speed. I immediately felt guilty, and it didn't work because I would wake up feeling like I let him down, I let myself down, and weeks or so later, I reached back out to say, hey, I want to say again, I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you. And it wasn't because the script wasn't good. I just felt like I couldn't do it. Keep me in mind on the next thing. And he said, well, I'm still waiting on you to do this one. So he showed us about half an hour, maybe 20 minutes of a cut of Social Network. And it might have had a little bit of temp, but there was wall-to-wall talking, so there wasn't much room for it. And then there was a very quiet ride home, the two of us, of like, how the fuck are we gonna, But it started us down a process. It was very enlightening and involved us making some choices that felt like big swings. It was David saying, Hall the Mountain King, but I want it to sound like Wendy Carlos.
Yeah.
Something like that. But that's the only time he was pretty specific about, I want Hall of the Mountain King, but I'd love it if it sounded like Switched on Bach version.
The thing with the Hall of Mountain King is that if you listen to the traditional version, it's got a choir and it's got this, that, and the other, and it's speeding up. Ours needed to carry all that same weight, but using electronic instruments.
We sent some music to David as a first pass to say, here's music we think feels like your film. This isn't for this scene and this isn't for that necessarily, but this feels to us like noble, and it felt tragic.
Lonely.
He dropped that in over the opening credit scene, right after the long dialogue at the beginning. Like originally there was I think an Elvis Costello track or something that made it feel like, you're on a college campus, and suddenly with that theme put right there, the whole film feels different and weird, kind of, and you're not sure what's coming up, set against the visuals. And that was, for us, was a huge moment of realizing the possibility of what could be done with music and film, realizing in a kind of godlike way how much you can influence how people feel about a thing. And wildly exciting to us. And to feel at the same time with David Fincher and the team he assembles, couldn't have had a more fortunate situation of a true collaborator. We didn't realize how great we had it until we talked to some other composers, and they're like, fuck you, forget that.
The site's live.
When we write music, it's coming from a place where its main intent is to have you feel a certain way. It's not coming from a love of melody and a joy of intricate chord progressions or technical wizardry. If you think of it in terms of the characters of the film and how they're feeling and put yourself inside it, which was what we did, then it was just intuition. I know what it feels like. In the case of the Zuckerberg character in Social Network, do I know what it's like to think something is so important you treat everyone like an asshole and wonder if it was worth it in the end? I kind of know what that feels like, I've been around Atticus, I've seen it, you know.
Girl with the dragon tattoo.
David wanted Sweden and the cold to be a character in the film. And we felt that we should explore that, what sounds cold. A lot of digital synths and digital ways of presenting sound tends to, in our opinion, feel icier and less comfortable. Before we start writing, we tend to think about what's the best tools for the job. We're in a room where any sound of anything is at our fingertips, whether we want to mock up something that could be performed by real people later with real instruments, or we're going to treat these instruments as the final product. The process usually is reductive of what's the minimal amount of things that could be ways to start. If it's a Nine Inch Nails album, we'll start with a concept of the Slip was all about what it might sound like in a garage with just a few mics. Having too much stuff to start with gets in the way. There's too many options now.
We were playing around with the idea of sound design as music as well. It's leading into the blowjob scene, and there's like a floor cleaner that was just in it. And we latched on to that because it sounds very innocuous, you know, it's just a floor cleaner. But we asked, could we get that file? And then we tuned it, I think, to a D, and see if we got the wow, wow, wow. And that becomes the score to that very unpleasant scene. It was a moment of discovery, and the idea of that kind of where does sound design meet music and music meet sound design, and how can a floor cleaner become the lead part to a piece of music.
We got like 30 floor cleaners in the studio now. That idea, though, sometimes puts us into a cage match with the sound designers and the people mixing the film. So we try to, when we take on a project, just say, let's work in concert with each other. I think there's a lot of times there's a rigid thinking that score does this, and it's by these instruments, and it's this frequencies, and the sound is, stay off my lawn, and, it's all in service to how can we help tell the best story? How can we make it the most interesting experience?
I hurt myself today to see if I still feel.
That song was written also quickly, the end of Downward Spiral, which was labored over. I knew the album needed a kind of coda and a resolution of sorts, and then that song I remember coming to life pretty quickly. I never questioned it. I wanted to kind of make it so you couldn't really hear me sing. It was meant to not be, I put noise through the whole thing, so there's no chance it can have any commercial life. It was an honest thing, and it wasn't meant to be song lyrics even. It was just, it's how I felt, and it felt desperate when I wrote it, and just had it gets to the core.
And you could have it all, my empire of dirt.
Years later, of course, with Johnny Cash, Rick Rubin, who's a friend, called and said, would you mind if we try this song? Of course not. It seemed weird, and I assumed they're probably doing 100 songs, so. Then I get the recording of it a little bit later, and that felt weird, because that's my song, and that big voice in there, and it just felt weird at the moment. I remember I was in the middle of The Fragile when I heard it. I'm not ready to process what this is right now. Okay, cool, yeah. And then I got the Mark Romanek video, and that was like, Jesus Christ,
I would find a way.
The thought of, here's a thing I wrote from a very intimate place, and it's connected with someone else with a larger-than-life personality, and then oddly it becomes a kind of epitaph for his life. It happened to be filmed by one of the greatest directors ever, and presented in such a beautiful way. It was like, reminds you of the power of music and how important it is, you know?
Albums that become my favorite albums, I don't get the first time I'm listening to it. But I can't stop listening to it because I know that there's something I'm not getting, you know what I mean? And Hurt was my way in to a record that I've listened to hundreds of thousands of times. Obviously, I didn't know Trent then. I was with him when we were working in New Orleans when Mark Romack's video came out. And I do remember watching that. I don't know what you can say about that video. You know, I mean, it was like it was incredible.
You know, I had the privilege and kind of mind-blowing experience of Bowie asking if we'd tour with him and collaborate with him. He's my number one guy, you know. And life was getting weird for me at that time. But that still seemed impossible that this was happening. And we would sing it live on stage together, and I distinctly remember standing on stage, looking over, and David Bowie, you know, singing my song with me, and thought, man, how the fuck, you know, how's this happening? Like, I'll admit, the reality of touring, you know, having done it for a long time, there's times when it's hard to stay present, but never with Hurt. I always am in there, and I'm feeling it, and I remember how I felt when I wrote it, and it's powerful. You know?
Watchmen. Watchmen meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to Trent.
For me, it was Lindelof. All the work David's done, particularly Leftovers, I thought he'd be an interesting guy to work with. And when I heard Watchmen was in the works, that could be a cool opportunity. Let's just throw a fishing line out to sea. And we hit it off right away. And I think as he learned that we weren't going to be rock band prima donna that just delivers a few tracks and says, figured out. Once he realized we were fully engaged, then that was an intense couple months.
It was very intense.
Picture of 5,000 drawings on the walls and him super animated telling a story that is impossible to even understand, and it's in different timelines and this and that and this, and he's not telling lots of the big secrets, and we left knowing less about what the story was than when we went in there. It was intense.
It's an incredible piece of work. What Damon did with that show, I think, is an incredible piece of television, and important.
When we were working on Watchmen, Damon had mentioned something that might have been in the works but didn't come to fruition, which was, you know, HBO does their little after the show. He was like, we want to do those, but we want them all to be in fiction of Watchmen. So it's like extending the show into blurring the line between what's in fiction and he could explain that better than I just did. But it was an exciting thing. So when we talked about putting out the score, I said, what if we put out the vinyl? Let's do vinyl for, like, we have enough that there's 3 volumes of stuff. Could we make these vinyl as if it's in the Watchmen world? So it's not Trent Atticus doing Watchmen TV show. It's a piece of something from your canon. There's some confusing bits of vinyl in the Watchmen shelf, if you can ever find a store that sells vinyl, that meticulously live inside, without breaking any fiction, the world of Watchmen. Why? Because it seemed like a cool idea at the time. I had played in some local bands as the keyboard player and wasted a few years dodging, acknowledging that I needed to be happy, I needed to write my own music, and I needed to see if I could write and what I had to say. And I think there was a fear that the answer to that question might be, I can't write, and then I don't know who I am anymore. I started honing in on stuff that would become what 9 Inch Nails was, what it meant to be. When I finally turn it over to a friend of mine that ended up becoming my manager, it was clear to both of us there was something that had an honesty and a power to it. It also had the entanglements of it, felt super embarrassingly naked because I wasn't a character, it was just me, you know. In what seemed like 2 hours, Head Like a Hole came together. It was irritating because I'd worked real hard on other songs, had been on their 100th iteration, and Head Like a Hole just kind of fell out of me one day. And because of it, I didn't feel like it earned its right to, it didn't feel that important to me because there wasn't enough agony involved in the process of it. And it was towards the end of the album. I had an opportunity to work with somebody I had great respect for, Flood, but I only had him for a few days, and I sent him a few songs, and one of the ones he wanted to work on was that. He was able to kind of objectively see what I couldn't see, and it really showed me what a smart, collaborative producer can bring to the table. And in that case, he's like, bow down before, that's the chorus. You gotta repeat, that was like, I don't even know where it was, but it was marginalized somewhere in the, you know. It kind of switched how I felt about it. It taught me that accept a good idea when it pops in your head, you know. And hard work doesn't necessarily lead to agonizing over certain songs. I think we're not meant to be born in this world, and sheer will is not going to necessarily make them great. And I remember being in Tulsa, Oklahoma, opening for, might have been Peter Murphy, playing Head Like a Hole, and I could see a guy, you know, towards the back, he's screaming the lyrics back at me. And it was a moment of, I don't know that guy. I don't know what he thinks it means, but whatever it means to him, I've provided that canvas that got me through as old as I was at the time, of music that I felt like was written for me. And I just remember feeling like goosebumps and thinking, if it's all over today, that was worth it. You know, that's what I want to do. I've achieved it, even if it's that one guy in Tulsa, you know.
So.
뭐야, 내 바지 어디 갔어?
I'm not done.
We had a list where we'd written dream projects or collaborators, and Pixar was on that list.
And that wasn't solely because we have kids. It's like, I think the movie-making pedigree of Pixar is incredible. And we'd always thought, you know, after we did Social Network, and then it was like, offers were starting to come in. It took a minute, but we had to have some conversations about what's our goal here? We wound up at a place where we realized working on a film makes us want to work on Nine Inch Nails and other non-film things. It keeps it fresh, and it's constant learning, constantly being in situations that we're not sure how to do them, and we have to adapt and figure it out, and that feels good. By chance, when the call came to see if we were interested, we were like, fuck yeah, we're interested. You know, in the movie, when described in a sentence where the lead character dies in the first 10 minutes of the film, that sounds pretty risky. How are you going to tell that story? You know, and in the hands of Pete Docter, seeing what he did with Inside Out and Up, there's no way we could say no to that.
Pete, he's definitely a guy who suffers from some existential angst. If you think of Up, and if you think, okay, it's a kid's movie about death. And I think, you know, that is part of his genius, is that we're able to take our kids to a film, or anyone in here, and as an adult, take one story away while our children are enjoying a somewhat different one, if you know what I mean.
From the beginning of the story, because the story is basically in two different realities, real world and the other world, whatever we were calling that, we knew there was going to be grounded, jazz-based real world and after he dies and he's in the afterlife. So our job on that was mainly to kind of a world that isn't tangible, that doesn't have taxis and streetcars and familiarity, how do we make that feel a certain way that's complementary to, but definitely distinct from New York City? And so John was working away, and we were in touch of knowing what the others were working on. And there was an intersection where the two things come together. That's the primary in-room collaboration, where we took the bones of an idea and then see him sit down and immediately kind of get it and interpret it and then turns into something else.
There, good show.
The truth of it is that we screwed it up by psychologically freaking ourselves out. The first chunk that we were working on it, we didn't realize it at the time, but we were writing music that we thought sounded like Pixar music. You know, it was incredibly stupid, but for some reason we wasted a good couple months working pretty solidly until I remember a Friday night, I said, this shit sucks. Everything we've done sucks. This isn't us. This is us trying to do something that's not us, that's also not good, you know. Often I'll throw that out because I'm hoping he talks me off the cliff and we realize it actually is genius, and you know, that wasn't the case. It was shitty, and he acknowledged it. And right after we had that awakening, you know, Monday we started up and everything was fixed. In hindsight, that seems like something we should have taken an hour to learn that, but being us, we wanted to really make sure we thoroughly went down the wrong path to know that it was the wrong path.
You let me violate you. You let me desecrate you.
Is it a surprise that it's like the biggest hit?
It's the hit. I felt the record was so uncompromising. Downward Spiral. It was an album I needed to make, but it wasn't reactive to "fuck you for giving me that money, I'll show you," you know. But there was a sense of, when I turned it in, I remember saying, "Sorry, you know, shouldn't let me do what I wanted to do." And immediately the label said, "That's the single." The record came out and it started getting played, censored, and it's time to make a video. I've always been frustrated in the world of videos because a lot of times you felt you were at the mercy of who you choose as a director, and every director is trying to make a demo film to become a feature guy, and you're just happening to film their experiment, and it was often what it kind of felt like. A song that I'd agonize over what it says and how it feels. Now there's a visual that can be equally or overpowering that gets thrown together in a couple weeks. But that video, when I saw what it was really fucking good, and that was Mark Romantic. I had the rare experience of, it made the song better, to me. As far as the track, there was always the frustration of what I'm actually singing about, and then the dumbed down interpretation, but that's all part of the lesson of, you know, once you let something out in the world, I can't control how you're going to feel about it. I love the idea of something subversive crept its way into strip clubs around the world, you know. I'm proud of that track, and I do enjoy it.
Challenges. The way we became involved with Challenges was we'd done a film called Bones and All with Luca, and as I recall, we received an email saying, my next movie is called Challenges. It's super sexy, all capitals with 3 X's. So what could we say? We said we're in. Luca had a vision that was interesting in the sense that he wanted it to be full-on dance music all the way through. And we kind of took his lead and then just rolled with it. I mean, what was interesting is we're playing scenes that fairly intimate scenes with very loud techno music, and kind of simultaneously having to score an emotional story. And it was challenging in ways that I think other scores haven't been.
I like the way you were challenging into that answer too. It's clever. It's clever. he sent us down a path we never would have wound up on. The role of music, I want it to be to drive the film and to be overwhelming and to be a rhythmic, you can almost dance to the whole movie. Okay, we'll try, you know. But to our amazement, it really did work, and it changed the film into being a different experience in a really interesting way. That's one of the things we think about when we take on film projects is what can we learn in the process. We certainly don't know everything. We barely know enough to keep getting hired, but to be thrust into situations where you have to adapt and figure it out and come out the other end saying, we learned a lot in that process. Our artistic trajectory of career, scoring films wasn't the end goal. It just kind of, opportunity came up, and in the process of figuring out how we could adapt our skill set to a new medium, respectfully, we learned that a lot of films get finished and then you put music at the end. It seems silly, you know, when you realize how important music is to how you feel experiencing the story. It just seemed like it would be cool if it was involved earlier on.
And I'd say Luca is the exception because we generally do start early. The thing with Luca is he's never going to put a bit of temp in. And, you know, that's one of the reasons that we try get involved early in terms of the world building and the DNA of the film. You know, so it isn't a coat of paint at the end. It really is, hopefully, a character in the film.